But if Peloton wanted to sponsor this show and encourage physical fitness,
I love spinning.
I would certainly be more than happy to share my Peloton experience and track my progress on this show.
We could even have a competition.
Right?
We could be like those commercials.
Just saying.
Who's pedaling harder?
Yeah, just...
I'll kick your ass.
Putting that... You will. Hey everyone, welcome to Affirmitivity. I'm Dylan. Today I'm talking with Nicole Blake. She is a former flight attendant, and we're going to get deep talking about medications and suicidal thoughts. She has dealt with depression pretty much all of her life, and she's an extra special guest because she's my girlfriend, which I can't imagine helps her depression. But we're here with our guest, Nicole Blake. So Nicole... We have a more personal relationship than a lot of people that I have on the show. Actually,
I hope so.
Pretty much than everybody I have on the show.
I really hope so.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that makes our dynamic interesting is that we both kind of speak the language of depression. Whereas we might have been in relationships before where people like understood that we were depressed but didn't get what depression...
They think it just makes you difficult.
You get difficult, I get just sad all the time, and I should just cheer up. Right. So just start me off here, because I mean, I know some, but like, when were you diagnosed? How long have you had depression? Like, what's your whole background?
So, like an official diagnosis? Or like, when do I first remember being depressed?
Both. Like, let's start from the beginning. Like, when you first start remembering it, and then when were you officially diagnosed?
Okay, so I don't think I can remember ever not being depressed. This is going to sound like a terrible thing to say, but I've never gotten much joy out of just being alive, like some people. I always in the back of my head just hoping for something bad to happen. Because I didn't ever want to have to look down the road. So, I remember being 14 and 18 sounded so scary. And so at 14, I was just hoping I'd get sick and die, or I'd get hit by a bus, or something would happen. I didn't really get officially diagnosed with anything for the first time, I think, till I was about 18. I had a little bit of a break, like a mental breakdown, and I was suicidal, and my friends picked up on this, went and notified the school, who then notified my mom, who then dived me to her therapist, and things kind of went from there. And then I was put on some medication for a while.
Now you said your friends picked up on you being suicidal. Like, it was something you were talking about, or there things you were like actually actively...
There were things I was like actively talking about. Like I said, I got into a car accident that day at school, and it was like the straw that was going to break the camel's back for me. And
you were kind of hoping that was it. No, it wasn't.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad of an accident, unfortunately.
Dang it.
It's just a parking lot fender bender, but I thought my parents are going to kill me. I can't take anymore, because at the same time, which I think my mother's a bipolar depressive, so largely untreated. So dealing with her was always a lot of fun. And at the same time, my father was an alcoholic. So there was a great deal of disruptive tension in my house. So one more thing was going to just make me snap. And this was the thing. And I don't really even remember most of the day. I don't remember anything that happened before the accident. I vaguely remember the accident itself. And then everything afterwards up until, I don't even remember, because I know one of my friend Jenny came home with me, but I'm not, since we both had our own cars, I'm not sure if she followed me. Like, I still can't remember. Like, it's all very disjointed. The only thing I remember clearly the next thing is being in my mom's therapist's office. And that did not go well.
How so?
My mother, to be fair, had a lot on her plate, like between my father and wife and raising 2 kids. And so for her, this was her last straw. And she turned on me pretty viciously. Was in my face. You're just a bitch. You're a selfish, manipulative bitch.
So it wasn't kind of like a way to help you. It was a way to help her. Like if she could fix you in a session, that would be something.
Yeah. And so this was like, it was as she thought I was just doing this to hurt her or to create more problems for her. And so the therapist actually had to throw her out of the office.
At least he could recognize that.
Yeah.
She could recognize that.
Yeah.
That it wasn't there helping you.
Yeah. And so things weren't good for a while, and then I got put on medication.
Did you go back and see this therapist more like on your own?
Yeah.
Okay.
On my own. My father was actually started doing therapy because he got a DUI, so he had court mandated therapy, and he was actually seeing that therapist's husband.
Okay.
And then we would have group therapy, like family therapy, all together. Yeah.
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I don't think I ever told you all that.
No.
Yeah. So.
I can't imagine that going well.
It didn't go poorly all the time, but my mother has a very strong personality, especially back then. As she's gotten older, she's mellowed a lot. But back then, she had a very strong personality, and things in these sessions either went her way or they went sideways. I'm not sure what my brother got out of it because he was, he's 6 years younger than me. If I was 18 at the time, then he was 12, so I'm not really sure what he got out of it. I've never really asked him. I probably should.
Yeah.
But
not even what he got out of it, but like what his perspective of it, like what he saw with you or your parents, something like that.
Yeah.
Because that would be that'd be like another set of eyes seeing what you're going through.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that pretty much lasted as long as my dad's court mandated therapy lasted. He wasn't really into doing more.
Right.
And then I didn't see a therapist for a while. But I told you this, I also have anxiety, which we also have in common. And my anxiety started manifesting itself when I was like 8 years old. We were talking about this the other day, that I would pick at the skin on my fingers and peel it back to my knuckles until my fingers were bloody. So I just think this is something I've always battled, and it just went undiagnosed for a very long time.
Now, did you understand, at least when you were younger, that was something different than what other people were going through, or did you think that this is just how people live, or how people your age live?
Yeah, I think. What you mean when I was really little, like when I was 8?
Yeah, and like when you were peeling your thing, just like that's, or just like that. Maybe not how you were like manifesting it.
I couldn't understand how other people didn't.
Okay.
It was like, how is their skin not peeling off their fingers? Like,
but not even necessarily that, but just that general sense of anxiety. Did you think that was something like everybody felt and just didn't show it, or did you think it was something that was different about you?
I don't think I had a perspective on that at that time. I mean, there was a lot going on. I just moved and changed schools. I was just getting diagnosed with a learning disability. So I was having trouble in school. I had a terrible teacher. She made me cry just about every day. So I knew something was wrong because I knew like I was the only one showing up at my friends' classrooms at lunch crying. Like, that's not normal.
Right.
And I realized like there was something wrong in my life, but I wasn't ill-equipped to really recognize what it was or whose fault it was.
Right. You couldn't even recognize that it was also potentially something going on with you.
Yeah, I couldn't.
You just knew something was wrong. You didn't know what or the source or anything.
Exactly.
Okay. So when did you start to recognize that it was your depression, anxiety, and...
I think I probably started to recognize it some in my teens. I recognized it in my 30s. I was actually having a talk with my mom because she was trying to give me I was married at the time, and she was trying to give me some motherly advice about me driving my husband at the time, like driving him crazy, because I would kind of micromanage the household.
Okay.
You know, he could clean something and I would go behind him and do it correctly, you know, rather than just accept his help. Right. Which made him not want to help, and then it made me into a martyr, and it was all, you know, but that I was so hyper focused on the state of the house. And at one point I even told my mom, I'm like, this is the only way I don't lose my mind. Like, I really felt like, I'm like, if I don't have control over everything, things are going to spiral out of control. And I realized that there was like a level of anxiety there, that I was managing my anxiety by being this like Uber housekeeper. Right. You know,
because it was something you could.
It was something I could
tangibly control.
I could control every speck of dust that landed in that house. You know.
Well, that's amazing.
It was astounding. I did a fabulous job.
I think if people at Pledge would want to talk to you about that.
Right. So, you know, and yeah, and so she was trying to give me like this, you know, like, you need to ease up. You know, you're gonna drive him crazy. And I was just like, I can't. If I can't ease up. I don't know what I'll do. You know.
Right, because if you relinquish that control, then you acknowledge that you have no control over anything. And it wasn't so much about driving your husband crazy, it was about keeping you from going crazy.
Exactly.
Right.
So so I realized then that there was an issue. Then fast forward to my divorce. I thought at that point I was depressed due to circumstances, that it was a circumstantial depression. You know, people get divorced, they get depressed.
Right, yeah.
And
not always a happy thing.
Right.
Sometimes it is
for some people, and good for them, you know, make their lives better. For me, this was not a happy thing. My ex knew that this was not going to go well, and we went into couples counseling beforehand, even though he knew it was a foregone conclusion that he was going to leave the marriage, because he wanted me, I think, in with a therapist prior to dropping the bomb.
So kind of like to manage the
because he knew it was, yeah. Because, you know, we had guns in the house. We both were to go target shooting. He made sure that the ammunition was out of the house.
That you weren't going to make yourself a target.
Yeah. You know, he knew that that's where I would go. And the fact that he knew that tells me he might have known more about my depression than I did.
Yeah. I feel like that can be true for a lot of people. Because I think in terms of like your depression, you know you're depressed and you know you've got something wrong. Like you were saying before, it's like you knew something was wrong, but you didn't know what.
Right.
And when you're in the middle of it, like when you're stuck in the middle of the forest, it's hard to see your way out unless you're above it with the map.
Right.
Like some people can be, you know, outside of it and see your patterns and see what you're doing better than you can.
Exactly.
So, yeah, there was probably that case there. Whether or not that was the best way to go about it, who knows?
Who knows?
But.
So then, you know, I really got into a really deep depression after the divorce. Again, I thought it was situational, and I thought I can pull myself out of this.
Right.
And I was not pulling myself out of it, and the anxiety was getting worse. And at one point, I went to urgent care because I thought I was having problems with asthma. Like I thought I was developing asthma because I couldn't breathe. I felt like there was an elephant on my chest. I could not get a breath. Days went by, I could not get a breath. I finally took myself to the doctor, and they're like, "This is anxiety," and suggested I start seeing somebody. And
like a therapist, not like
you
need a man. You need to find yourself a good man.
Not like start seeing somebody socially.
I know you're divorced, but honey, you can't be single. You need to see somebody.
No, like a therapist or a psychiatrist.
You need to date a therapist.
Would they really listen?
Well, I don't know. Would they want to really bring their work home with them? Ooh. That'll be something to ask a therapist on this show.
Yeah, you should have an ask a therapist segment where people write in. Oh, therapists, how do you date? So I started looking into treatment options at that point, because I'd gone a while without seeing a counselor. So I got back in with some counselors. It took a while to try and find the right fit. And then one of my counselors said, counseling will help you, but you really do need medication. And at that point I was like, really? Like, this is just situational? And he was like, no, it's not. And one of the things I found out at that point is like your brain, the way it was explained to me, your brain starts running certain patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like driving on a dirt road. If you keep driving on that dirt road, your tires are going to groove into that road and create a track. And when you're depressed, your brain's running this depression track, and it's digging the grooves deeper and deeper and deeper until that's the way your brain will naturally function. And sometimes we need medication to help us repave the road, so to speak. And so I looked into, a psychiatrist near me that was, well rated. It was going to take a little while to get into it, because when they're accepting new patients, it's always hard. So but meantime I was getting worse. I was having panic attacks in my sleep, night terrors. The depression was just sometimes painful, like physically painful. Like I wouldn't be able to stand up. I would just drop to my knees. And and it was getting bad. So I actually took myself to a mental health clinic in the county, which is not something I'd recommend if you can avoid it. This sounds like a terrible thing to say, but it wasn't meant for people like me. It was meant for people with like much severe mental issues and people who have addiction problems and substance abuse problems. Right. One of the first things you do when you get in there is you pee in a cup, and they make sure you're not on drugs. And but it was a stopgap measure for me. They got me on some medication until I could get into where I was waiting to get into.
Right.
Which at least it made me feel like I was doing something proactive.
Right.
And then I got into the psychiatrist's office that I wanted to get into. And then I was like really officially for the first time diagnosed with severe depressive disorder, bipolar depression, severe anxiety disorder, and insomnia.
And you were how old?
40.
So this took like
40 years.
35 years.
Yeah.
Of living like that to finally get some sort of, at least an answer, definitive
answer.
Wow. Okay. Now, and there was a time jump in there too, because we went from like, your teenage years up into your divorce in your 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your like general state of mind, your life like, throughout like say your 20s?
There were times I was suicidal. One time in particular, I'd also suffered from a chronic health condition called chronic fatigue syndrome. And chronic fatigue and depression can feed each other.
Yeah.
They're like a vicious circle. And I'd been having some problems with chronic fatigue and hadn't been able to get to work and didn't know how I was going to pay my rent. And I thought, I just can't do this anymore. I'm tired of being sick. I'm tired of being broke. I'm tired of the constant struggle of managing my health and because I first got sick when I was 13, so I'd been dealing with that for a long time. Right. And I was like, I'm just done. And I was literally like laying down the towels and getting out the razor blades, and a friend of mine happened to call, and I pretty much said goodbye. And he's like, just don't do anything for 24 hours. Just 24 hours, don't do anything. We can fix this. And I was a flight attendant at the time for Continental, and he lived out of state because we were based in, we're both airline employees. Mm-hmm. He flew in the next day, paid my rent, saw to it that I could get back on my feet, took care of me because I wasn't feeling well still. I was still having problems with the chronic fatigue. But the underlying issue, like it was a stopgap measure for that moment.
Right.
But the underlying issue of just not wanting to be here that never left.
Yeah. That's like your like default mode of thinking. Just like, I don't want to do this
anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd mentioned too, somebody else I'd interviewed recently, he was saying how he really hates how a lot of his depressive issues are tied to his financial situation. Like, the more dire things look, the more depressed he gets, and when things are looking better, he feels pretty good about himself.
I don't know, when things get better, it sounds like a terrible thing to say, but I'm just waiting for them to fall apart again. It's like, things are okay right now, but tomorrow I could be homeless. I tried, I was talking to a therapist at one point about having moments of gratitude and really focusing on gratitude and, like that positive aspect. And I was driving through town one day and was feeling anxious, and I was at a bus stop, parked at a stop sign stopped at a red light.
And there's a bus stop.
And there's a bus stop next to me, and I saw these people getting on a bus, and I thought, you know what? Things could be worse. I have a car, and it's paid for, and it's running fine, and I don't have to take a bus to get to work, so I'm doing okay. And within less than 30 seconds, that spiraled into, oh my God, I'm going to be living in my car. Like, like that moment of gratitude just spiraled out of control where, well, what if I don't have a job tomorrow? And what if, this goes wrong and that goes wrong and I can't pay my rent? Well, I'm going to be living in this car. And
so you have this pattern, you have this like worst case scenario pattern.
Yeah.
Like, no matter how good things are. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's exhausting.
Well, and it's exhausting too, because the sky's always falling, and you're in that sense of trying not to keep the sky from falling. You're either pushing the weight up or trying to pull the thing out, and you're not physically doing it, but the mental effort it takes is physically exhausting.
I describe it as like I feel like I've been living in a pressure cooker, like most of my life, just constantly waiting
for that shoe to drop, like you say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now what has kept you going through that? Like, how do you, if I may reference your shirt, press on through your depression?
Yeah, someone got this shirt from somebody's website.
Shameless plug.
Gotta wear them.
Not that it's sponsoring these videos, but hey, it certainly helps to offset costs. But seriously, because that's a long time to go if you're like feeling that hopeless, like, in your early mid-20s, and now you're not in your early mid-20s.
I am not.
But that's a long time to keep going like this. How are you not? Like, you would think that if it was that much effort before, you'd be completely exhausted, you would completely be done by now, and you're not.
Yeah, I honestly, in recent years, I have found a unique coping mechanism. Before that, I think it was just not wanting to hurt my family, especially my brother. Although at one time we did have a suicide pact, which probably is a little dysfunctional. In a bit. But then I got married and I broke our suicide pact, and he's never wanted to make a new one. So,
yeah, there are details there that are missing. How you get married and that breaks your suicide pact.
Well,
See, to me, a suicide pact means like, hey, let's not commit suicide. And then I got married and that broke the pact. Or
no, the suicide pact was my brother and I were going to commit suicide together when I was 45 and he was 40. Okay. As long as neither one of us were married, because we didn't want to, hurt a partner.
Okay, gotcha.
And so that was, if we were unmarried and didn't have families and nothing was tying us down, when we hit this age, when I would be 45, 46, that's like the age difference between us and my brother hit 40, then we would commit suicide together. So that way we didn't have to worry about ever living a life without the other, because we're so close.
Gotcha.
And then I got married and I broke the pact. Yeah. Special.
Side note, her brother is still with us.
Yeah, he's fine.
I want to actually, you bring that up, so I want to kind of like touch on your mindset about that.
Okay.
Because you say, one thing that kept you from doing it is you didn't want to hurt your family. But what was the one thing, so that's something that pulled you out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like your mindset going into it, though, that was convincing you to actually make that happen. What is that thought process, or what at least was it in your head? Like, why was that the viable option?
It would be an end to the suffering. I've been living with anxiety since I was 8.
Right.
Depression probably just as long. I just didn't know it.
Right.
And I just wanted it to stop. It's like, isn't there a quote? Didn't we talk about this? Suicide isn't about ending your life. It's about ending your pain.
Yeah.
There's a quote like that.
Well, there's what I would tell. I've told a couple therapists this, and I've told a couple doctors this, prescribe me meds and whatever. Because I've had a couple close calls where like I was like right there planning to do it. And of course it was the thought of like my kids finding me or something like that, or just,
right.
Or not even them finding me, but finding out that that's how I went. I couldn't let them do that. But the reasoning behind wanting to do it, it wasn't that I would tell my doctors, I would say, I don't want to end it all. I just want it all to end. Like I would, like I just want to go to sleep one night and not wake up the
right.
next morning. Like if something happened and I would just asphyxiate and not feel it and then just peacefully go.
Yeah. And that's still kind of my mindset. You know, like, it's a terrible thing to say, and I hope I don't offend anybody watching, but I go for my yearly pap smear and I'm like, oh, please let it be cervical cancer. Please. I just something that would take the onus off of me.
Right. That is now no longer up to you to do it.
Yeah.
And it's now no longer your depression doing it. You can just say, you have it out.
Oh, I've got cancer and I'm just not going to fight it. Oh, okay. And because the other thing about suicide that's a little scary is the idea of screwing it up. And if anybody would screw up suicide, it would be me. So.
Well, and I think that's an important thing to bring up too. Like you say, not to offend anybody. It's like, I think a lot of people who might be offended by that would be the ones who don't understand what this mindset is like.
And and I understand like there are people who've lost people to illness.
To
cancer.
Yeah, I have.
AIDS,
it's horrible to watch them go that way, and I would not wish that on anyone.
And I want to make that clear, but I still can't help the way I feel.
Right, because it's a means to an end.
Yeah.
It'd be a different kind of suffering, but at least you could focus on that suffering as opposed to just the constant barrage of negative stuff.
I almost feel like in some ways the physical suffering would be easier. Because hospitals will give you morphine for that.
Right. To dull it. Yeah.
There's not much they're gonna do.
It's the physical suffering is easier, for some people to cope with. People are like open about it, just like when people start cutting, it's that physical manifestation of pain. It's easier to handle than the mental.
Exactly.
I've gotten much better about this in years, and that I would do a similar thing. I used to beat my head against the wall because I couldn't. I would do it almost because I couldn't like get my brain to work properly, and I wouldn't know how to make something work, or I wouldn't know how to express myself in such a way that the frustration of it would make me want to just hit my head. And one out of frustration to feel that pain as opposed to the emotional pain. And two, there was almost that sense of I want to like reboot what's happening. It's like, when an old TV wouldn't work, you'd hit it on the side. I'd feel like that's what I was doing, is just trying to just kickstart my brain into working. But it was also that momentary physical shock to take the emotional pain away, which ended up not helping me and not helping the people around me.
Right. No, it would not.
No.
Yeah.
And there was something else I was going to ask you about that, about your mindset about the suicide. I can't remember what that was.
Well, I kind of have a different mindset about suicide, and I don't know if it's a product of my depression, but I feel like I feel like we shouldn't have this stigma against suicide. We talk about the stigma about mental health issues,
right.
But I think there's also a stigma about suicide. When you hear someone's committed suicide, people always say how selfish they were.
That was actually something I wanted to bring up. Yeah.
And I just don't think, I think it could be said that the people who demand that you stay attached to a life that's making you sick and miserable are equally selfish. And that's not a popular viewpoint.
Well, no, it's not a popular viewpoint, and I'm actually going to share this to a degree, because it's the ones who are just like demanding that you stay and hold on or whatever is, you know, it's almost a selfishness for them. They don't want to experience the loss of you. Right. I know for me, and I know for a lot of people that I've talked to, there's that feeling of it. I mean, it's absolutely not a selfish thing in that twisted mindset, because you get to a point where you feel like your existence and your depression being inflicted upon the world is such a burden to other people that you are legitimately doing other people a favor by not being around anymore.
I've had those thoughts where it's like, I'm not worth the air I breathe.
Yeah, and it's not even that you're not worth the air you breathe, but it's just like I feel like everybody's going to be better off without me. I'm doing them a favor. Right. And in the mind of someone who's suicidal, I mean, that's not selfish. That's right. You know, you're doing it kind of in a twisted way for them. You're doing it for you to end your own pain, but it's also like you get that in your head that, you know, they're going to be better off without this inflicting their lives, because you feel like your pain is a burden. And now you're going to take it away from them too. But then, you know, in a lot of cases, like you say, like with your family or me and, you know, my family, my children or whatever, you realize the pain that you would inflict upon them when you do. And that's almost worse, and that can stop you from doing it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I take umbrage with the argument that, you know, committing suicide is a selfish act.
Yeah, I really do too.
Because in that mindset, it's actually you're doing it because to help other people. So we had a phone call come through, and we had to
take a little break.
Let's take a little break. We're back.
We're back
with Suicide Talk.
Suicide Talk with Nicole and Dylan. So verklempt.
Okay, well let's take this opportunity to like shift gears anyway. Okay. So one of your unique perspectives in terms of like the effect of mental health on people is what you did for a living for most of your life. Right. Which was?
I was a flight attendant. I was a flight attendant through most of my 20s. From the time I was 21 till I was 29. Then I took a little bit of a break. And then after my divorce, I started flying again. I was 38. And flew up until just recently when I got furloughed.
So yeah, that's pretty much your adult life.
Yeah.
With the exception of the time you were married, because you stopped to be a housewife. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's been like your adult identity. Okay, so how does that kind of like play into what we're talking about? Like what is unique about that in terms of depression and anxiety? And
well, it's not a job that is good for somebody with depression and anxiety. There have been some studies, these are a little bit dated, but the CDC did a study and it showed that flight attendants are 1.5 more times likely than the general population to commit suicide. They're 2.5 more times likely than the general population to have substance abuse, like alcoholism. Another study done by, I'm trying to remember, it was National Medical and Nutritional Research study, showed that flight attendants were 2 to 5.7 times more likely than the general population to suffer from depression, fatigue, sleep disorders, and anxiety. Your dealing with odd sleeping hours,
Right.
odd eating hours, constant threat of critical incidents. You're constantly, I mean, in a way, it was a perfect job for me because you're constantly waiting for that other shoe to drop, like
That other shoe's constantly dropping.
yeah, there's the confrontation of dealing, with people on the airplane sometimes. There's a loneliness and an isolation to the job. And I just feel like I need to say this. If you're watching The Flight Attendant on HBO, I almost said it.
HBO Max.
At HBO Max. That's not an accurate representation of what I'm talking about. But yeah, it's, there are times, especially like alcoholism, like there are times when you get into your hotel and there's nothing open except the bar. So where do you go? You go and you grab a drink and, a quesadilla or something. And so it's really easy to start developing those bad habits. Mm-hmm. Or if you don't want to do that, then you just lock yourself up in your room. We call them slam clickers. I was a slam clicker, especially these past 6 years, where I just locked myself up in my room for the entire duration.
To slam, click.
Slam, click. And just deal with the loneliness.
So I get the, especially the sleeping, disorder
Mm-hmm.
part, because you're constantly on weird schedules and flight times and shifting time zones and
Mm-hmm.
all that sort of thing. And even like whatever, like overnight layover you might have, you could have 24 hours, you could have 4 hours, but you're like being shuttled off to a hotel to nap for 2 hours or whatever and come back.
It's an exaggeration, but yeah.
Okay, but you've just got very weird sleep patterns that I get. So I don't know how much you remember or can pull out from like these studies. Like, what do they attribute that higher risk of poor mental health and rates of suicide and everything to flight attendants? Like, what about that profession?
Well, a lot of it, like I said, is the sleep. I think sleep and diet has a lot to do with it. The constant threat of critical incidents. And in recent years, now you've got a threat of terrorist attack. So you're not just worried about like a fire on the airplane or somebody getting sick. There's bigger threats involved.
Mm-hmm.
That became a big thing for some flight attendants right after 9/11. I was flying during and after 9/11, and we lost quite a few flight attendants. They just couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
So
my former stepmother-in-law was a flight attendant, and after 9/11, she said, "I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore.
I don't want to do this anymore." So it depends on your threshold. There's an increased level of confrontation on an airplane.
Mm-hmm.
People get combative and confrontational, and you're in this enclosed environment. There's nowhere to go. That can, if you've got someone with anxiety, that's hard. It's made me definitely, like, I'm a conflict avoider, and it's turned me into a conflict avoider. Even in my personal life, I will do anything to avoid a conflict. Like, I will avoid a conversation, it has spilled over into the other parts of my life, because just avoid confrontation at all costs.
Right.
So, there's and just the loneliness and the isolation of the job, that people think, people assume you land in a city and you automatically get 30 hours and the whole crew is out having drinks and dinner, and that's not what it is.
You're getting into a van.
You're getting into a van. You're going to a hotel, and even if you have 30 hours, it might not be like the right 30 hours. If you're getting in at 11 o'clock at night, you're going to your room. Like, no one's going out. And you're sleeping for a bulk of that. And then you wake up the next day and it's like, well, what's there really to go do? I got to get ready soon anyway.
Yeah. And
your 30 hours is up and you spent it alone in your room. So it all depends on the trip. But Mostly you have like a 12 to 15 hour layover. That was before coronavirus hit and
Right.
airlines started changing the way they do things. You can have as little as 10 hours in your room, and you pretty much have to subtract 4 hours from the layover time as far as usable rest time, because your rest starts when that cabin door opens and it's over when you scan back in the next day. So all your travel time, all your getting ready time, that's all factored into your layover time. So if I've got 10 hours in the city, I've got 6 hours to sleep. I've got 12 hours in the city, I've got 8 hours to sleep. So so a 15-hour layover isn't really that much,
Right.
you know, so you just hang out by yourself in your room.
Yeah, because all that other stuff that goes along with it, you're not getting paid for. That's not
Right.
you. Yeah, because, and I've heard, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your time on the clock doesn't start till the cabin door closes.
That's correct.
So all of that stuff, while you're standing there waiting, like greeting everybody as they're coming on board the plane,
You're technically not getting paid.
you're technically not getting paid for that.
Now, trips are rigged. We call them like trip rigs, you know, the way you get paid. It could be argued that in some ways you are kind of getting paid for it, but strictly speaking, you're not on the clock.
Right.
So, yeah, you're not on the clock. So that's why sometimes we're reluctant to like lift bags
Right.
during that time, because
I ain't getting paid for this shit.
yeah, you know, it's like I'm not lifting your bag when I'm not technically on the clock, and my OJI might not get covered if I get hurt.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. Like,
Yeah.
it could be like, well, you're here, you should help. But if you get hurt doing that, you could feasibly, that could be all on you.
It could be
and
all
not
on
the
you.
airline.
It's a fight.
Wow.
Yeah, that can be a potential fight. The airlines like to say no. They like to say, oh, no, you're covered. You're doing your duties. But I've known people who it's happened to, and it's been a protracted, drawn out fight.
Wow.
Yeah, to get covered for that.
I'm going to close this door really quick.
Okay.
Talk about your meds.
Oh, my meds. I love my meds.
What meds you started on, what you went
No,
through.
this is actually
like,
really
fine.
great, and
Yeah.
this is something I would really recommend to people. I've recommended to people who live in my area. I recommended the office I went to for this particular reason. Is when I went to that clinic, that county clinic,
Right.
county mental health office. They just pretty much went, you're depressed. Let's put you on Zoloft. Let's give you some. Can't remember, like I said, it was like Valium for the anxiety, and called it a day. And like I said, that was a great stopgap measure.
Yeah.
But when I went to the office I'm at now, they did a DNA test, and I should find out for you. Maybe you can put a link to it, like if you do show notes.
Yeah.
What it's called. I can get it next time I go to my doctor's office. And you do a cheek swab, and they send it off. And they come back with the results of what medications you're genetically predisposed to have bad reactions to,
Sorry.
or will work well with you, on this genetically
Right.
based level. And they were able to like immediately roll out like Zoloft, not a good medication for you. Stop taking it. So because a lot of people have problems with medications when I talk to people, because it's a lot of trial and error.
Yep.
And if you're on the wrong ones, it can make you feel really horrible. And
It's like those medications that they'll, show on TV with everybody going to like concerts in the park and doing pottery and all that sort of thing. And, ask your doctor about whatever. And it's like an antidepressant medicine, and one of the side effects is may cause depression or suicidal thoughts. I'm like, that's the exact opposite of what I'm taking this for.
Right, exactly. And some of them, I had a medication that I was on. It wasn't an antidepressant, and it actually worked great. Like mentally, I felt so good, but it made me break out in this horrible rash. Did I ever show you the pictures?
Yes, I remember.
Yeah, it made me break out in this horrible rash, like all over my body. And apparently that rash, if left untreated or if left to get worse, turns into this like skin eating like condition, and it can be really bad. So the minute I called my doctor and I said, developed a rash, could this be because we upped my medication? She was like, stop taking it. And then, I went in to get something from the pharmacist, and they're like, yeah, don't take it. But this genetic test really helped weed out the medications that I'd have a poor reaction to. And I was able to start off on the right foot with a good medication kind of out the gate. And so I didn't have these struggles, because a lot of people don't want to go on medication because their experience of medication has been so bad.
It's been so bad.
And this really helped. So I would suggest finding a doctor's office that does this service.
Yeah.
And then the company who does it, a lot of times insurance doesn't cover it. But they work on a sliding scale pay thing. I think the most anybody will ever pay is like $20. It would be like a regular copay. And so, I mean, it is so worth it.
Yeah, just I can think of the number of times that I've tried different meds to find out what worked, what didn't do anything.
Right.
You know.
Yes, I was put on Prestique right out the gate. Now I'm on the generic because insurance. And then we've worked through a couple different anxiety meds. I was on a couple different, and I can't remember what they're all called off the top of my head. But
we're not sponsored by any of them, so who cares?
Some didn't do anything for me.
Right.
Or some I had to take double the recommended dosage for it to even work.
Wow.
So we got to the point where I'm on clonazepam for a bad panic attack. One of the medications I'm on, which I think is interesting, is propranolol, and it is a beta blocker. And it's actually used for people with like high blood pressure and you know, heart issues and things like that. But what it does is if I feel an anxiety attack coming on, because sometimes you can just start to feel it inside you, or you start to get a little shaky. If I can take one of them in time, it drops my blood pressure, drops my heart rate. So I'm not so hyper focused on the physical manifestations of my anxiety that I blow it out of proportion in my head and it spirals out of control. So it helps me manage that. And then in talking to my doctor, you know, at first it was just diagnosed as severe depressive disorder. And then I was talking to her and I said, you know, sometimes I'm so depressed I can barely get out of bed. Like I just don't want to get out of bed. All I want to do is sleep. I have no energy. And then all of a sudden, like, things will kick into gear for me. And I feel so productive. Like, nothing can stop me. And I just jump out of bed running and, you know, and she realized that I actually suffer from a form of bipolar depression. So I'm not, like, overly manic. It's not like I have like these hyper manic episodes
and like huge mood swings and
it's just that the problem is that when I'm in these, you know, somewhat manic episodes, there's an increase in my anxiety. So I balance this thing, you know, between like I'm either super depressed or I've got all this energy but I'm super anxious. And it's trying to find that balance. So to help me find that balance, she put me on an additional medication that's for bipolar depression called Latuda. I'm sure you've seen the commercials on TV. I think it's the pottery lady or the painting lady.
The painting lady or
so
like refurbishing a garage. Or,
something like that. Or they all move in really slow motion.
Yeah, they're going to some sort of like outdoor concert in the park.
Yeah, with a picnic.
Thing.
Totally.
And they're all of a certain, like, you know, age demographic, and
they all have an 8-year-old child for some reason. Have you noticed that? Like, they all have 8-year-old children.
And clearly of a certain financial demographic as well. Interesting.
Yeah, people who can afford antidepressants.
Right.
So. So those are the meds I'm on. I take Ambien for sleep, but as you know, I've been trying to, now that I'm not flying, and I'm on more of a set schedule, I'm trying to cut back on the Ambien.
Right. How's that going?
Like
some nights better than others?
Some nights better than others, yeah. And, but I do feel like sometimes mentally I'm in a bit of a fog.
Okay.
And I've talked to my doctor about it, and my recall isn't what it once was. My memorization isn't what it once was. And it's very frustrating because I feel like I'm losing an edge or a sharpness. I was concerned it was the medications, and my doctor said, you know, it could be, but it's kind of, you know, with your mental health, it's kind of the price we've got to pay. But it could also be just my depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety will dull your senses.
Right.
they will make your brain foggy. They will,
right. Well, because it's also too because your brain doesn't want to deal with the reality of things that are going on, so your depression will dull that, so you don't feel the heaviness and whatever.
And I've read, depression can affect brain function. Like it absolutely affects. I thought I read something, and so I don't want to put this out there as like total fact, but I read something that depression can cause a form of brain damage, which
I almost
makes
feel
sense.
like depression is a form of brain damage.
Might be. So I try and go easier on myself, and try and do brain exercises, Sudoku and crossword puzzles and things like that to try and keep myself sharp, force myself to memorize things. I still gotta force myself to memorize your phone number.
Yeah, because it's real easy now to just, go click.
Yeah, that's the reason I'm like, well, maybe I'm not in a fog. Maybe I've just gotten dependent on technology. Maybe it's not just me. Maybe it's society. But I feel like it's me.
Or it's a combination of both.
Yeah. I do feel like it's me, though, to some extent. So that's where I stand with my meds, But I have to see my doctor every 3 months. And we go over how I'm doing and how I'm feeling and everything. And then we decide if we're going to make any changes to the meds at that point.
Right.
So it's constantly being reviewed. No one has just stuck me on meds and walked away, which is what happened when I was 18. Is someone stuck me on Prozac, walked away. And
it became like this will do.
This will do. And I took Prozac and I took Prozac and I took Prozac until... this is kind of, I don't know if I ever told you about this, until I had, I was literally so anxious and upset. I was pulling hair out of my, I was just sitting in the shower, rocking, and I pull hair out of my head. I was just.
So the Prozac was working.
And I was with Continental Airlines at the time, so I called our EAP and I was like, something is very wrong with me. I need help. And they sent me to a counselor who said, you really kind of do seem to know what's going. You're very self-aware and you have an idea of what's going on with you. I don't think this is mental health so much as it is pharmaceutical. So they sent me to a pharmacologist who said, and how long have you been taking Prozac? And I was like, 8 years, And he was like, oh my God, that's not a drug that's meant to be taken long-term like that. If you take Prozac for too long, it will cause the problem. It's there to stop. And so he had to get me off the Prozac, and he used another antidepressant to kind of balance it.
Right.
And he was the pharmacologist, so I just let him do it. And that helped. But yeah, it wasn't even, I thought I was losing my mind, but it was actually a medication problem. So I'm really glad to have found an office that monitors my medication, every 3 months.
I think that's a good thing that we've come to in recent years, in that, because a lot of people want to say that there's, there's a cure for depression, you take this pill and you're fine, or
it's not a cure.
Yeah,
it's a way to manage.
Well, that's the thing. There is no cure. It just becomes more and more manageable. I feel like it's something that you always have.
Right.
And just how much it affects your life is another thing. But yeah, I think there was a time it's the joke was everybody in the early 90s, everybody's on Prozac.
Right.
But whether or not they needed to be, it became a trendy thing to do.
Well, not something, people will call it the happy pill. And that is just something that just burns my buttons. It's not a happy pill. There is no drug that will make you happy.
Yeah.
There will be drugs that will make it easier for you to find happiness.
Right.
But
that will help you manage just that nagging, negative, whatever in your head, that you can think a little bit more clearly.
But so many people think of them as happy pills. And no.
And that's so not what they do.
No.
That's not what they're meant to do.
Yeah, so that's one of my pet peeves when it comes to that.
But then it's a good thing now too, because like you're saying, they just put you on it and great, you're done. You're now on a medication.
Yeah.
And nobody would ever question it. And then it started to get to the point where you would start to have those issues, and they discover that, over time, this is now having the exact opposite effect of what it was supposed to have.
Yeah.
So I think that's great that, we're monitoring more, and doctors are, keeping a better track of what's working and adjusting as need be. And I love that idea of, I had no idea that the DNA test existed.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that'd be a great thing when you see a doctor, you know, about this sort of thing, ask if that DNA test is available, because oh my gosh, the time and pain that will save you just to know. Because I went through like 3 or 4 different meds.
Yep. And
some of them just affected me in such a, I couldn't function.
Yeah.
You know, or didn't want to function.
Yep. People complain about feeling like they're, you know, always underwater.
I had that one.
You know,
and it's never the same medication either. So it's so, you know, you can't just say like, well, Wellbutrin made me feel like I was underwater, but that doesn't mean it's going to make somebody else feel that way.
Exactly.
Somebody else going to, Wellbutrin worked great for me.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to find the one that works for you, or the combination of things that work for you.
Well, and I went in with a very specific request too. I was like, because you know, I know a little bit about the topic because I've been on and off with this for so long. I went, if you put me on a medication that makes me gain weight, I will kill myself. Like, it sounds like a joke. It sounds like a joke, but I was totally serious. I was like, you know, at the time before COVID, like I put on the COVID-19, yeah.
Except definitely. You have not put on 19. There's no way.
I put on 9-ish inches. So but Dylan can tell you, like, prior to that, I was hitting the gym hard. I was super fit. I was a personal trainer for a while. You know, I really worked hard at the gym, and I was like, if I get put on a medication that makes me gain weight with as hard as I work, I won't have it.
Right, because that will also too, that will count, and that's not even just a vanity thing either. I mean, because now it's countering everything that you're putting in so much effort for.
Into.
Why am I trying so hard?
Right.
If it's not going to do any good for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more than a vanity thing.
It was a little bit of both.
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both. There was vanity in there.
Of course, sure.
There was vanity in there, but you know me well enough.
Well, let me ask you about that too. That actually brings up another good point. So when you were like, you know, hitting the gym, working out, and everything like that, how is that affecting your mental health? The more you were doing that.
Well, that really helped. So that's kind of like two sides of the same coin kind of thing. What that really helped is that was my, you know, quote unquote cure for chronic fatigue syndrome. Okay. Is for so long I'd withheld from like too much intense physical activity because I was afraid it would wear me out and make me sick. And that was kind of the thought, especially back in the 90s when chronic fatigue was first becoming a thing, is, you know, pace yourself and don't do too much, don't overdo it, you know, mild to moderate exercise. And then what I found out as I started working out more is like, no, my body needs the hard exercise. And that put me into remission with chronic fatigue, which helped my mental health because now I wasn't fighting my own body. Right. You know, physically. And I didn't need the same amount of sleep, so I wasn't giving into the depression quite as much. So for me, working out really, it helped on that physical end of it, which in turn then helped with my mental health as well. But again, it was something I easily got obsessed with, much in the same way that I got obsessed with the housework when I was a housewife. Right. You know, I'm going to control.
It was something you could control.
You know,
when you feel out of control.
Yeah, I'm going to control how much weight I can lift. I'm going to control, you know, what I eat. I'm going to, you know, have all this. It was a big control mechanism, and not a bad way for me to manage my anxiety by any means. You know, there's a lot worse. Yep. And there were days I'd have anxiety attacks at the gym, and but you don't cry at the gym. So you push through, and you know, it helped. It helped, you know. And there is something, you know, if you feel better about yourself, that does help too. Yeah. You know. Yeah. It sounds superficial, but you know, there's something to it. There's something to it,
and yeah, I fully admit that I have the hardest time motivating myself to get up and do something physical.
Well, now since COVID, me too.
Yeah, that also makes it really difficult. It's hard to like go outside and go places. Lots of gyms are closed.
And it was you know, it was easy when I was flying. I'd come home, I'd have 4 days off in a row, hit the gym every day. And then when I was on the road, like if I had time to hit the gym on the road, great. If not, that's okay. I'd come home and I'd have 4 or 5 days off and I'd be able to go.
Yeah. And I don't have $2,000 to invest in a Peloton.
Right.
But if Peloton wanted to sponsor this show and encourage physical fitness,
I love spinning.
I would certainly be more than happy to share my Peloton experience and track my progress on this show.
We could even have a competition.
Right?
We could be like those commercials.
Just saying.
Who's pedaling harder?
Yeah. Just
I'll kick your ass.
Putting that, you will. It's true.
Yeah.
You're not wrong.
I'm not. But yeah, it's COVID changed the game.
Yeah.
And I think it changed the game for mental health. That's the other thing.
For a lot of people too, because I think a lot of people who hadn't dealt with depression before are getting like that lockdown depression and are starting to, because even though you might not be necessarily predisposed to it, like circumstances can.
Oh yeah,
there
is this thing as situational depression,
and like you were saying too, just like how like the tires, start grooving, and you start living like this for a while, your brain will start to rewire itself into a depressive brain, and yeah, people are developing depression during this time. Like there is,
and
coronavirus sucks on its own. It's all
just at
these
my
side
airline. Just at my airline right now, when furloughs started in October, after the summer of Corona and furloughs started, we lost, to my knowledge, at least, and there might have been more, but I'm sure about 2 flight attendants to suicide.
Wow.
And I know we weren't the only airline. So.
Yeah, statistically you wouldn't be.
Yeah.
So,
it's coronavirus has taken its toll on all of our mental health, even people who might otherwise have been okay.
Yeah.
So that's why we need to normalize the conversation.
Right. And
why you're here.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
That's why you're here.
That's why we're here.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hey everyone, thanks for watching. I really hope you got something out of this episode. If you like what we're doing, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. You know the drill. And if you don't like it, move on. Don't be mean in the comments. That just says more about you than it does about us. I'm sure there are 1 or 2 other things on YouTube you control. If you or someone you know is having suicidal thoughts, please, please, please call emergency services, call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. Just call someone. You are not alone. You're going to get through this, and the world is a better place with you in it, whether you see it or not.